A cold harbor, disguised patriots, and tea chests crashing into black water. One night of theater made rebellion irreversible. Before anyone understood the full stakes, the atmosphere was already charged with revolution, protest, and imperial power. The people inside this scene were reacting to immediate pressure, not to the legend it would later become. That is what gives the opening its force. The event feels sudden, but the tension underneath it is already combustible. In just a few beats, a local action starts to look like a national turning point. To understand why this moment mattered, we have to step back and see the America that made it possible. Set the stage in 1773, revolutionary America, and show the national tensions already building before the Boston Tea Party. On the surface, the country still looked functional, but the deeper arguments were already hardening. Everyday life, public expectations, and political institutions were drifting toward collision. The pressure points sat in plain sight, even if few people wanted to name them clearly. By the time the crisis arrived, the ground underneath the story had already shifted. With the background in place, the next step is to meet the people who pushed events forward. Introduce Samuel Adams, colonial protest leaders, British officials, and the East India Company, and clarify the motives, fears, and incentives driving the story. Some actors wanted restraint, others wanted advantage, and others believed retreat was no longer possible. Their motives mattered because this story was shaped by human choices, not by destiny alone. Each side brought a different fear, a different ambition, and a different line it would not cross. Once those motives collided, the room for compromise narrowed fast. That narrowing pressure is what made the coming trigger so dangerous. Trace the trigger that turned latent tension into action and pushed the Boston Tea Party toward open crisis. The immediate cause looked small to some observers, but it landed on a political landscape already primed to ignite. What changed here was not just the event itself, but how people interpreted it in real time. A single decision, clash, or signal suddenly made restraint feel weaker than escalation. After the spark, the story could no longer move at the old pace. From this point on, every reaction adds more weight and less room to turn back. Show how public emotion, elite miscalculation, and rising stakes narrowed the options for everyone involved. Public emotion rose, rumors spread, and each side started planning for outcomes it once hoped to avoid. As positions hardened, miscalculation became more likely and moderation more fragile. Institutions still existed, but they were losing the power to cool the situation. What had been a dispute was becoming a crisis with its own momentum. That momentum leads straight to the breaking point. Identify the final decision point when retreat became politically, morally, or militarily difficult. This is the stage where final warnings fade and the last off-ramp begins to disappear. Leaders, crowds, or commanders now face decisions that will define everything that follows. What makes a breaking point dangerous is that it feels both inevitable and avoidable at the same time. Once the line is crossed, the consequences can no longer be managed in the old way. And then the defining event arrives. Recreate the defining event at the heart of the Boston Tea Party with visual detail and narrative momentum. Now the story reaches the moment people remember, the scene that seems to condense the whole crisis into one image. But even here, what matters is not just spectacle, it is the decision, movement, or collision unfolding beneath it. In real time, this event felt confusing, immediate, and irreversible. When it ends, America is not the same country it was before the chapter began. The next question is what the aftermath actually looked like. Explain the immediate aftermath, who gained, who lost, and what institutional or cultural changes followed next. After the climax, the damage spreads through institutions, communities, and public memory. Some people gained power, others lost it, and many paid costs they never chose. Consequences are rarely limited to the place where the event happened. What follows next helps explain why this story keeps echoing across generations. It also sets up the myths and misunderstandings that later crowd around it. Myth versus reality. It was not random vandalism, it was disciplined political theater aimed at imperial authority. Memory often flattens messy history into a cleaner story than the evidence can support. Myths survive, because they are emotionally satisfying, politically useful, or simply easier to repeat. The harder truth is usually more complicated and therefore more revealing. Getting the facts right changes the lesson we take from the event. That is what makes the final takeaway worth stating clearly. Symbolic acts matter when they expose a much deeper crisis of legitimacy and representation. The point is not to force the past into the present, but to notice the patterns that still repeat. This story endures because it shows how power, fear, ambition, and institutions behave under pressure. The lesson lands best when we treat history as warning, guidance, and mirror at the same time. What mattered then still matters now, because human incentives have not changed as much as our technology has. That is the reason this episode still belongs in the present tense.